My brain is pea soup.
Yeah,
So I'm hoping that any of that comes through in the recording today will be forgiven by our audience members,
I'm sure it will be. It'll be
and
forgiven
my
by me.
co-host.
Not that there's
Yes.
really anything to forgive, but
I'm also thinking about now a really good pea soup that I had um, in Denmark in on this little island called Fænø. There's a restaurant that we went to, and we were there in the off season. So like typically the restaurant's not open during the off season, but because we were, a giant class of 30 people, we did like a cool tasting menu and this like pea and bacon soup, and it was so good.
I have never had pea soup. I've never really thought about it as being appealing.
It's thick and I don't know, it was the perfect thing, smoky and thick and yet refreshing on
Hmm.
this night where it was frozen solid outside. It was maybe 10 degrees out Fahrenheit. It was
Yeah.
rough, in early February. And I had just gotten over being incredibly sick for like 3
Oh,
days.
bestie.
And so it was exactly what I needed.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And then also we left that restaurant. It was first of all, it was a gorgeous little place. But we left that restaurant and it's like right on the coast of the island.
Hmm.
So we went up. So um there's like a little like sea break, little dike. Um Besides me, I was the other little dike there.
I'm sure you
Um
weren't the only one.
I mean,
Were you the only one that you knew about?
no, because there was two other non-binary people in my class alone.
Hmm.
Um who were of the sapphic persuasion.
Incredible.
Um and I won't speculate on the sexualities of other people that I did not know, because they're
That's
real
fair.
people and not fictional people. Um,
I just meant more in the
but
sense that you may not have been fully alone if there were no other little dykes that you were aware of. But
fair. But we went up on the little dike, um, and like I said, it's like 10 degrees. We're all freezing our asses off.
mhm.
And there is, a large contingent of us that would love to just get right back to where we were staying that night and like get into our sleeping bags and conk the fuck out. It had also
Mhm.
been a long couple of days. Um, but then I looked up and I have never seen that many stars in my entire life. There were no lights. You couldn't see any lights from the mainland. Um, and you could see the Milky Way. And it was just very cool. Um,
That's beautiful, bestie. I love that.
anyway, but yes, my brain is pea soup, but probably not that good a pea soup and not to be followed up with stars. But I will do my best to follow it up with as many dirty jokes as I possibly can.
And that's something. I was going to say that, of course, your brain is the best pea soup, but, dirty jokes, stars, both good.
I'm sure that although they're tramping through mostly cloudy nights, there's still got to be some very interesting stars they are following
Oh, I'm
um,
sure.
through the wilds of Rohan. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fandom Apprentice. We are back to discussing the books.
Yes. So happy to be back. I'm ready. I'm excited.
Um, And we're back with Two Towers,
Mhm.
starting it off. Do we have anything else we want to talk about before we get into it?
Just that I think because we are people who were alive in 2001, there's always going to be a little piece of my brain that crosses the wires of Two Towers and Twin Towers and has a moment of
Uh,
confusion. But nah, I'm ready to just get started.
we pick up with Aragorn, right?
Yeah, on a nice, bright, sunny note. This is just a real cheerful beginning to this one.
I fully thought that this like was at the end of um, Fellowship.
Mhm.
My brain had placed Boromir's death at the end of Fellowship, and hi, spoilers, Boromir's dead.
Yeah, the title of the chapter is The Departure of Boromir. So, you know.
Well, I mean, because at the end of Fellowship, he was discussing leaving and going to Minas Tirith. So I suppose if you're going to be optimistic about things, he could be
But
going to Minas Tirith.
we also see him studded with arrows on page 1. And it's not even a full page because, like, a quarter of the page is taken up by the chapter number and the chapter title. So, in that tiny amount of space, he doesn't die on page 1, but it is his death is imminent on page 1.
So us picking up with Aragorn running, I feel like this seems to me like right where Sam splits off at the end of Fellowship. We've sort of gone back in time a
Mhm.
little bit
Yeah.
to pick up with what's happening with the rest of the Fellowship. And this is going to be a hallmark of this book because we're now dealing with the Fellowship split into so many parts. We're going to have to keep going back in time,
Mhm.
various chapters, and sort of coming up to the same point in time.
Yeah.
But Aragorn is looking for signs of Frodo. He sees an eagle in the sky and then hears Boromir blowing his horn, calling for help.
Mhm.
But Boromir is already on his last breath when Aragorn gets there.
Which is very dramatic. And I don't know if you have any specific lines from that exchange. It's a short exchange. I have one little tiny bit of like his last words.
Go for your bit first.
Sure, sure. So Aragorn finds Boromir. He's slumped against a tree. There's dead orcs all around him that he's presumably killed all by himself. And basically, Boromir gets Aragorn up to speed super quickly with the truth about what happened. He says he tries to take the ring from Frodo, and it didn't work, and Frodo ran away, and he feels terrible. And then his last words are, "Farewell, Aragorn. Go to Minas Tirith and save my people. I have failed." "No," said Aragorn, taking his hand and kissing his brow. "You have conquered. Few have gained such a victory. Be at peace. Minas Tirith shall not fall." And there's a lot to unpack about that moment. There's, I guess, the first thing that sticks out to me is you have conquered. What is it that he conquered? I read it sort of poetically as the ring's influence, but also there was a lot of orcs. I don't know if there was something specific that you were thinking of with that line.
No, I just think his last words really highlight the quest that he has always been on,
Mhm.
right? The rest of the company has always been on the quest to destroy the ring, but Boromir has always been on a quest to save Gondor.
Mhm.
When Elrond is detailing the company, he's saying that there's representatives from each of the free peoples of Middle Earth, right? You have the four hobbits, you have Gandalf to lead the quest, and then you have Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas to represent the other three peoples of Middle Earth: elves, dwarves, and men.
Mhm.
And and then it says, and Boromir will go with you too. I don't have the exact line here because his journey takes him in the same direction.
Yeah.
Boromir was a part of the company, but he wasn't at the same time. And at the end of Fellowship too, he is solely focused on the survival of Gondor.
Mhm.
and on Gondor conquering, not falling before Mordor, and using the power of the ring to do it because he was taken in by the influence of the ring. But I think, even in his last words, even though I think at this point would see himself as a part of the company, his goals have always been separate from the rest of the companies.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he was ever able to reconcile that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I know we kind of blamed a lot of his shitty behavior on just being entitled and kind of whiny, which I still think is true. But also, he just fundamentally had different priorities.
Mhm.
And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, in these first two chapters, we get a really different perspective on Boromir, both from the rest of the party and from the Rite of Rohan later. And I definitely feel a lot more favorable, maybe sympathetic, maybe, but I feel a lot more fondness towards Boromir after reading these chapters than I did in Fellowship.
I think the fandom would agree with you here. I think the it's interesting because I always sort of, you know, had in my memories a fond memory of Boromir.
Mhm.
And then doing our close reading of Fellowship, it was like, wow, actually, he kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But now in the Two Towers, we get his redemption with his death.
And we had, I don't know if you were there or if it was just Miles and I hanging out with some of our other friends, but I was talking to them about Boromir and how I didn't like him. And one of our other friends was like, "Oh, but Boromir's misunderstood. I think that you should have more of an open mind." And I don't think that he had remembered which book he dies in either. And so I was just
Uh-huh.
saying, "Don't." He said, "There's something that happens that might change your mind." And I said, "Don't tell me what it is. I don't want to know." But now, with that in mind, I think that I see where he was coming from.
Yeah. I think Boromir being on his quest to save Gondor, he never quite got through his head that the quest to save the ring is a quest to save the world, which also includes Gondor.
Mhm.
I also love the gentle masculinity that we see here.
Yes. Yes.
The the gentle masculinity, like, within the line, taking his hand and kissing his brow. He
Oh,
knelt weeping, clasping Boromir's hand.
oh, my heart. That was beautiful.
It was very cool.
And that's just such, we kind of saw this with Gandalf's air quotes death too, that I got so distracted by the air quotes that I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. That there's no hangups. They're not preoccupied with any display of machismo or whatever. This is just pure expression of emotion. And especially because we do have the two humans, this is human emotion. This is a human moment. And I think that everybody has had times where just the intense feelings of a situation will overcome any social norms or propriety or other boundaries where you're just connecting with another person during a really intense moment. And this is one of those times. And I thought that it was really beautiful to see the two humans share that because it was a very human thing.
It's really interesting too because, I don't know if you've started the book, but I've been reading, our book for our book club this month, which is about American masculinity.
Do you have it checked out at in your library system?
Probably.
I am first in line. So I think when you finish it, do you have the audiobook or the text?
Audio.
Yeah, so I am in line after you, as very, very frequently happens. One of us will be directly in line behind the other one. So when you finish it, I will get it.
Cool.
But no, I haven't gotten to start it
Yeah, it's only like a 3 hour and change audiobook.
yet. Mhm.
So it's a quick read, but very, very good. That and currently listening to the full Maria Davna Headley translation of Beowulf.
Mhm,
And in her introduction, she talks pretty heavily about masculinity in the poem.
mhm.
And specifically, she has a line about how Beowulf is not in a manual for healthy masculinity. It is a manual for how to live as a man if you are, in fact, closer to the monsters than you are to the men.
Oh, shit.
Um, which is just a brilliant line. But we're not talking about Beowulf right now. We
It always comes
will
back to Beowulf. Can we make that a law of
later.
fantasy? That it always comes back to Beowulf?
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, with English language fantasy, yeah, I think we can make it a law that it always comes back to Beowulf.
Yes. Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a new law. I like this one.
Sweet. I'm not sure which number law this is. 4? Cool. We'll call it 4, maybe
Sure.
5. Gimli and Legolas show up and they help Aragorn. They help take the time to bury Boromir. Or
And
not bury Boromir, but
is this before or after they realize that Merry and Pippin are gone?
um I don't have in my notes when exactly they figure that out. Well, but I thought Boromir said something about the hobbits being taken.
Yeah. So it's roundabout this point they realize that also two of the company are unaccounted for in addition to Sam and Frodo. But yeah, like you were saying, they have to decide what to do with his body. Because they're not just gonna leave him there.
Well, it's they are gone, the halflings, the orcs have taken them. I think they're not dead is what Boromir says.
Ah, gotcha.
And doesn't manage to answer Aragorn when he asks if Frodo was there.
Mhm,
But Aragorn then tells Gimli, that Boromir fell defending the hobbits and that he'd been sent to follow Merry and Pippin, uh, but he doesn't know if Frodo and Sam were among those taken.
mhm. Got it.
Um, but so they know that people from their company are missing and have been taken by orcs, but they still take the time to give Boromir the respectful send off that he deserves as a warrior.
Yes.
And you can tell a lot about a culture by how they treat their dead. Even when time is of the essence, they're not going to leave him.
Mhm,
Right? And they, discuss that they can't bury him, they can't build a cairn over him. So they give Boromir like sort of a mini ship burial, a little boat burial.
mhm.
Um, which of course for me immediately brought to mind Ahmad ibn Fadlan.
I don't think I'm familiar.
Um, he was a, I want to say, ninth century explorer or 10th century explorer who wrote of his travels among the Kievan Rus, the Volga Vikings, who were initially likely peoples of Scandinavian and Finnic extraction who settled along the Volga River in what's now Russia.
Mhm,
And in his travels, he details the death of a chief and a ship burial. And ship burials were not common throughout Northern Europe at the time, but not uncommon either. And he talks about within that ship burial that when a poorer man dies, like, but still a warrior, not a chieftain, they don't give him a full ship burial, but they do build a smaller boat to send him off in that they burn as they set afloat.
mhm.
Um, and for listeners, if you've ever watched the show Vikings, early in whether it's season 1 or season 2, I think it's season 1, um, when the chieftain dies, the Jarl, uh, they give him a ship burial. And that description of the ship burial is almost shot for shot created word for word from Ibn Fadlan's writings, with a
That's really
few
cool.
weird anachronisms because why would, like, they do things like taking off the silver bracelets of a slave woman who's going to be sacrificed to go to the afterlife with the chieftain, and raising her up over a door frame, which is written directly into Ibn Fadlan's account, which you wouldn't do. That those aren't shots to include in this show if you haven't read the account. But then they also have some strange anachronisms.
Yeah.
Um, Point is, uh, this piling of weapons uh, in the boat. They are the weapons. The orc weapons become grave goods for Boromir. His
Hmm.
cloak, his Lothlorien cloak, becomes grave goods. They're identifying him to any person who comes across him, and to themselves, they're identifying Boromir as a powerful warrior.
Yeah.
And their point is that the boat will be dashed on the falls of Rhoros on the rocks at the bottom of the falls, and that's where he will spend eternity. Although um, there, it says later on that he may have been born out to fully out to sea.
Yeah. And there's a couple more things from that I wanted to get into that kind of take it in a different direction. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you had anything else Viking related that you want, because I didn't want to skip past that if you weren't done.
No, I'm sure I could talk about even Fadlan's account, but I don't think it's really, unfortunately, all that relevant.
We can talk about it later, just the two of us, because I do want to hear more about it. But several other things from that, because I paid a lot of attention to this scene. So while they are collecting weapons from the orcs to put in the boat, they realize that these are weird orcs and they have different weapons and different clothes than what orcs are typically seen with. And they all have this elven S rune somewhere
Mhm.
on their person, and the party realizes that they work for Saruman. And at first they were thinking, okay, S, Sauron, easy peasy. But then no, Sauron doesn't use elf runes, so it has to be Saruman. So he has his own whole army of orcs, which is interesting. I don't know why his orcs are different. I have a feeling we'll probably get more details about that as you just do your secret knowing chuckle. But that was interesting and that was very important to note. And then talking about them arranging Boromir in the boat with his grave goods, I had written down a little paragraph from it. The grey hood and elven cloak they folded and placed beneath his head. They combed his long dark hair and arranged it upon his shoulders. The golden belt of Lorien gleamed about his waist, his helm they set beside him, and across his lap they laid the cloven horn and the hilt and shards of his sword. Beneath his feet they put the swords of his enemies. So you have the identification grave goods angle of that. But what stood out to me about that was, I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast, maybe with the Barrow Downs, but probably not. I just, as a person, am really interested in contemporary American death practices and our attitudes towards death and dead bodies. I'm a huge, huge fan of Caitlin Doughty. If anyone knows Ask a Mortician, I love her. I've read all of her books. And she has this perspective that I share, that American culture is really as removed from the reality of death as it is possible to be. We don't generally, broadly speaking, understand anything about what a dead body looks like or how a dead body behaves. We have this idea that as soon as a person dies, their body is dangerous and contaminated and terrifying and will make you sick and is something to be avoided and never discussed. It's this huge, huge cultural taboo. And that was not always the case in the US, especially before the Civil War, for reasons that we could do a whole other bonus episode about. But seeing this really loving attention on Boromir's body just made me so happy. I love seeing this opportunity to connect and care for this person who they had a strained relationship with. And none of them really knew Boromir that well, but they're not grossed out by the fact that he's dead. It's like the masculinity thing. It's not another mental hurdle for them, but I enjoyed seeing that and thinking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved to see that because I love thinking about the ways that we can have a different relationship with death. And so that just made my little death positive heart happy.
I was also thinking about the symbolism of uh, where they placed all the goods too, of the weapons underneath his feet, because he's, as if he's standing on them, the conquering hero,
Mm-hmm.
um, still holding in his lap, um, in front of him, the cloven sword and the cloven horn and the broken sword, because he is those are still his weapons of war, those are still his tools, um, and then his treasures, the pillow beneath his head of the cloak,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the treasure of the belt still on his waist.
And this is, I know that we can't talk about Boromir's burial forever. We have so much more that we need to talk about. But also thinking about how these stories relate to D&D. This is not a D&D scenario because all of his stuff is super valuable. Those elf cloaks are a big deal. And, they are willing to part with those things because of how important it is that they give Boromir a proper send off. But if this was, I've also been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate. If this was Baldur's Gate and my party member died, A, I'm save scumming. I'm going back and I'm reviving them. But B, I'm taking all of their stuff immediately. So they're not picking Boromir's pockets and seeing what they can use. They are able to make it beautiful and symbolic and meaningful.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But also they all have their own elven cloaks, and as they talk about later, like, they are taking out everything from their packs that they can possibly live without.
Yeah.
So anyway, but they cast off Boromir, and you get a line that threw me back to the chapter in Lothlorien,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, I think it's Karen Amroth, Saren Amroth. No, yes, Saren Amroth, where I think it's Saren Amroth, where Aragorn has his little sending spell to Arwen, and then
Mm-hmm.
he leaves and came there never again as a living man,
Yeah.
right? Which was the line that threw you for a loop.
It did, yes.
Um, but then you get this line of, and he was not seen again in Minas Tirith, standing as he used to stand upon the White Tower in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they improvise a little song, a conversation between three of the winds, north, south, and west,
Mm-hmm.
and a listener who's asking for tidings. What have you heard of Boromir? And the winds are all saying, I saw him fall.
Yeah. It's specifically it's Aragorn and Legolas sort of going back and forth. Aragorn sings about the North Wind, Boromir the Fair. Legolas sings about what is he? No, Aragorn starts with the west, Legolas does the south, Boromir the Tall, then Aragorn does the north, Boromir the Bold. And Gimli doesn't sing, which is convenient because apparently in Gondor it's very taboo to talk about the east wind. So that works out very conveniently.
Well, because the east wind blows out of Mordor.
Mhm.
And so, anything coming out of Mordor is to be feared.
Yeah. And at first, when we read this part, because you read this chapter to me, because I now have you on the hook to read me the first and last chapters of all of these books. Thank you, bestie. I love you.
You're
When we had
welcome.
when we had initially read this, I was being kind of glib about it, and I was going, "Fellas, is it gay to sing a song about how hot your dead friend was?" Because there's a lot of lines about how hot Boromir was, and I respect that. But I feel like I can't make dumb little jokes about it because the more I think about Boromir, it's just really moving and it's really beautiful. So I don't feel like I should cheapen it. But also, I had to mention that I had this sort of cheap shot about it anyway.
But also, fellas, is it gay to talk about your dead friend and how hot he was?
Yeah, it might be.
It
And
can
we don't
be.
want to fall into the trap of anytime men express affection for each other, it has to be gay, but it's a queer reading. So,
This is a gay podcast, and if we have our way, all of these people are queer. Because as I think we said or alluded to way back in some of our early episodes, especially with the elves, if you live that long and you're just straight, that's boring.
yeah, and straightness is a human concept anyway. But
um
I digress.
anyway, they're deciding where to go, and one point Gimli says maybe there is no right choice.
Mhm.
They're trying to decide whether to follow Frodo or follow the orcs in the hope that Merry and Pippin are still alive, because they do discover that Frodo and Sam have gone.
Yes.
They do deduce that from the various clues, but ultimately they decide to go after Merry and Pippin because, at least with Merry and Pippin, there's a trail to follow. It sounds like on the other side of the river, it's wastelands, it's stone, and hobbits have been previously mentioned to move very quietly through land,
Hmm.
not leaving a lot of traces, and so they're not going to be easy to track through that wide open land. And they could have landed anywhere in their boats
Yeah.
or in their one boat. And so they decide to go after Merry and Pippin in the hopes that they might actually catch them.
Hmm.
And we move on to chapter 2, The Riders of Rohan.
Yeah. And the phrase the Riders of Rohan is something I have heard before. And
Mm-hmm.
I had written in my sort of introductory notes, which obviously we don't see her in this chapter, but I kind of associate the name slash character of Eowyn with Rohan. I don't know if she has anything to do with Rohan and if she's the I am no man person because I've seen gifs of that. I don't know if or how she is related, but my brain is just grasping at straws of things that I recognize. So put that on the back burner for now. But those were initial thoughts. But we pick up with the three hunters and I'm loving all
The
these
only thing
named.
that
Yeah, yeah, bestie.
the only thing that is occurring to my brain right now is,
Mhm.
if any of you have ever seen the Pachelbel rant, which is about how there's a bunch of songs built on the same four chord progression as Pachelbel's canon in D. Um, and the comedian who's doing the rant is talking about how he doesn't even know Pachelbel's first name. It's probably Johann. They're all named Johann. Um, and the fact that Rohan is a human name was making my brain go, it's probably Rohan. They're all named Rohan.
I love that.
um, it is Johann Pachelbel, which of course the comedian
Amazing.
knew, but it is Johann Pachelbel. That's the joke.
I like to imagine that all the
um,
riders, they are all named Rohan. They only give individual names to the horses.
Hasufel and Erod.
Yeah.
Um, but we are now once again seeing indicators of time.
Hmm.
Waxing moon, dusk deepened as they set off. They're setting off right in the evening, and just they're going to run straight through the night.
And they do literally run. They are booking it.
Oh, I have some calculations of how far they traveled and how fast
Okay.
later on. We'll get there.
Later. We'll save them.
Um, but very quickly, by like midnight, they find dead orcs,
Hmm.
potentially killed by other orcs, because they're still, so they are fleeing um, north, right through the hills of the Emyn Mule, because they started around Sarngibir and they're fleeing north through the Emyn towards the plains of Rohan. And I have a very hard time conceptualizing where everything is in this section of the book because the way that my brain remembers it, it's that like the that Fangorn is to the south bordering the White Mountains and that Rohan is even like further west, um like almost due west from Emmanuel, but that's not really the case. And so, because, I, a person who's been looking at the map of Middle Earth since I was 5 years old, can't keep this straight in my head and would not expect any of you to. I will also, sort of from here on out in our posts for the week, make sure that I post like a section of a map in our Instagram posts for the week so that you can look at like, where are we in Middle Earth today?
You are so good, bestie. Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
I always sort of like think of the quest in all parts of it as sort of progressively moving south constantly, which is why I feel like I think of Fangorn as to the south. But that's not really the case. Like in this section, they're moving back north, but they're moving northwest rather than southeast where they were initially coming. So, I'm someone who always needs to know where things are. So, um, if you look for the social media post this week, if it's not already up by the time you're listening to this, it will be soon. You will find the map. So if that's not a reason
Excellent.
to follow us on our Instagram at FanAppPod, I don't know what is.
Hmm.
But they find the dead orcs, killed by other orcs, and they stop with sunrise. And Aragorn makes a comment as he looks to the south where they were initially headed. And I have a little comment here, Professor Tolkien. Blue and purple stood the white mountains, rising into peaks of jet, tipped with glimmering snows, flushed with the rose of morning. That's 4 colors, none of which are white.
True.
Blue, purple, jet, and rose.
Maybe they're white sometimes when they're covered in snow.
Yeah, I mean, they are topped with glimmering snows.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. There are real white mountains in the United States, and they're not white, presumably. So I don't know how they name these things.
that's fair. Strictly speaking, the White Mountains are the Erad Nimrai, or Nimrais, however you pronounce it,
Thank you.
which means White Mountains.
Hmm.
But anyway, they continue tracking the orcs. Legolas has better vision than anyone else, right? He can see the eagle in the sky, which Aragorn saw over the river
Hmm.
earlier. And also at the end of Fellowship, there was a flying beast of some sort that Legolas shot down over the river.
Hmm.
So I just want us to keep in mind the various flying things that seem to be in Middle Earth too.
Okay. I will be accounting for another three-dimensional aspect of our battle terrain.
Yeah, but also he can see the orcs. They're at least 12 leagues away, which is, for those of us who don't speak in leagues, 36 miles or 66 kilometers. The curvature of the Earth typically sets in, I believe, at 12 miles. So Legolas can see past the curvature of the Earth because the elves can treat the Earth as flat.
This is true.
So that's why elves can see super far, is because the Earth is flat to them.
Yeah. And I had noted this later, but we can talk about it now. I have terrible eyesight. I have really, really, really bad eyes. I can see without my glasses generously 6 inches in front of my face before things are just indistinct blurs. So there's so much discussion of specifically Legolas's awesome eyesight. I literally cannot conceptualize of being able to see anything that clearly, even with my glasses. Could be because even though they are my eyes, I treat them really terribly. I don't put them in a case when I go to sleep. I have some microfiber cloths that I wash them with occasionally, but I don't treat my glasses very well. So even with them on, can't see super great. This is a superpower that is unfathomable to me.
Yeah, and I've noticed actually my eyes getting worse over the last couple of years, last year or 2. And I've, like, occasionally worn glasses, but my prescription is so low as to basically make it not worthwhile most of the time.
I think you've tried on my glasses before, right? And seen
Yeah,
just how super thick they are. Yeah.
horrific.
They're not
Um,
as bad as my spouse's, but,
I've also tried on
it's
your
pretty bad.
spouse's glasses because I've been friends with them for a long ass time, like, almost 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, and they also have terrible vision. So, um,
Yeah.
I understand my superpower in having really good vision, especially because also both my parents have, bad eyesight.
Mhm.
And my brother and I have always just had, like, "Our eyes are just fine, thanks." But I've definitely noticed it start to deteriorate now in my late 20s.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so yeah, no, Legolas being able to pick out details at, miles and miles away is wild. But now I spent a lot of time going back and forth in this chapter, picking out all of the indicators of distance and time,
Okay.
right? It takes them running all night until the next morning, moving through the hills of Emmenmule, north from Sarngabir to the plains of Rohan, which, I think a part of that is, the up and down nature of the Emmenmule and the rocks and everything. But then as they move out of the Emmenmule at dawn of the next day, right, then they start following the trail of the orcs through the plains. And then they're making really good time
Mhm.
because they were still in the Emmen Mule uh, as the sun was fully up on the dawn of the second day. And uh, it's winter, early spring. It's now February 27th because Boromir dies February 26th.
Mhm.
They set out from Rivendell on December 25th. So it's been 2 months on the road. And um, assuming a latitude roughly equal to France, you've got about 10 hours of daylight, right?
Okay. Oh, you really calculated this.
I really did the math.
I love you so much.
um, because by nightfall uh, on that second day, they've made it, it says 12 leagues from the Emmen Mule, which is again 36 miles or 66 kilometers.
Mhm.
On foot, carrying gear, tracking orcs. Um, with only 2 short breaks, they said, um, and Aragorn making a short pit stop to go off and find the brooch of Pippin's cloak,
Mhm.
which he cast off, right? So that leaves, let's assume that it takes roughly an hour from them to get out of the Emmen Mule at sunrise down to the plains of Rohan. So that leaves 9 hours to cover 36 miles. So 4 miles per hour, right? Which averages a 15-minute mile, which is not a full run. But anybody who's carried gear over distance for a full day, uh, 9 hours, 2 short rests, that's incredible to keep that pace going.
And also for the three of them to stick together because we have a human, a dwarf, and an elf who all presumably move at very different speeds. I am shocked that Gimli is able to keep up on foot, especially with Legolas, but even with Aragorn too. They're significantly taller. They have longer legs. So Gimli just like scurrying, that's
Fucking booking it.
yeah. And at least
Um,
Legolas also doesn't need to sleep and he can do his elf trance thing while he's running. So
does it say
he's
that? Where does it say that?
it does. Yes. Let me pull it
Because I
up
know it talks
one.
about later how it doesn't really seem like he sleeps.
Yeah, 1 second.
I see at one point, as before, Legolas was first afoot as if indeed he had ever slept, but that's after they rest for the night.
Yeah, there's another thing where it talks specifically about while he's running.
I found it.
Okay, thank you. What's the quote?
Um, In the waybread of the elves, he found all the sustenance that he needed, and he could sleep, if sleep it could be called by men, resting his eyes in the strange paths of elvish dreams, even as he walked open-eyed in the light of this world.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yeah, so he's just got weird superpowers. Um, but that doesn't come in for a little bit. They do, in the detritus of the orcs, find that the whole bunch of them, which was initially made up of what seemed like orcs from Mordor, orcs from Isengard, um, and orcs from the north, from the Misty Mountains, it seems like the whole bunch of them are now headed for Isengard.
Mhm.
And Aragorn is like second guessing himself. He feels responsible for everything that's happened in the last 48 hours. He's feeling like the fellowship is fractured. One person's dead, two are kidnapped, and two slipped off in the dark of night without a word. Right. And I think he's taking all of that like as his fault.
Yeah.
Right. Which, yeah, he's the leader, but he didn't intend to be.
Yeah, he's done everything he could. But,
Yeah.
I think that's a sign of the fact that he cares. Not that I want him to be tormented, but it makes sense that he would feel that way.
But they reach dusk on that second day, and they've been running for 24 hours straight at a minimum at that point. Right. They've been running since just before dusk on that first day, right after Boromir died.
Mhm.
And they're saying like there's no way that they can track them through the night, and also like they're going to be less effective if they go on this way.
Mhm.
Um,
They could miss something if they're trying to track them in the night,
because there's no light, not even from the moon. And did you notice the gendering of the moon?
I did not.
The moon is gendered as he.
Fascinating. That's very
Um,
unusual.
Yeah, because I feel like in a lot of mythology, we see the moon gendered as feminine in contrast to a masculine sun. But here and in Fellowship, also, in when Frodo sings the song in Bree, we have a
Mhm.
masculine moon and a feminine sun.
Very cool.
So the sun raised up her fiery eyes. She could hardly believe. To her surprise, they all went back to bed. They rolled the man slowly up the hill and bundled him into the moon.
I love that.
Um, yeah, which is just kind of an interesting little contrast. Um, but Aragorn at the beginning of the next day casts commune with nature and takes a quick nap in the dirt so he can hear horses in the distance. um, I love that it like literally says that he was down there so like listening to the ground so long that Gimli thought he'd fallen asleep.
Yeah. And that's a
But it's
cool. Oh,
yeah,
there you go.
it is a cool ability that you were about to say. Do you want to talk about that more?
No, there's not really more to it. Just I remember I had talked about Gimli before being able to hear the speech of plants and stones. And so it seems like Aragorn has a similar thing, which would make sense as a cool ranger power.
So listening to the ground, like for horses coming through, is an actual thing. Um, Sound travels across long distances better through liquids and solids than it does through air.
Mhm.
The clarity of sound can be something that is, more perceivable to our human ears, like through air. But like that's why sonar is so useful underwater, right? Is because sound travels a greater distance
Hmm.
because it's passed between molecules, right? And when those molecules are closer together, like in a liquid or a solid, it's easier for it to travel between them. There's not as much space for it to travel between.
That makes sense.
But they begin the quote third day of their pursuit, right? So they've run for an evening, a full night, one full day, slept for the for like a few hours, got up at dawn, and now they're running again for a second full day.
God.
Um, and at the end of the day, they comment they're all fucking tired, like Sauron is casting some sort of spell on them.
Hmm.
And they think that's definitely why they're all so tired. Not that they skipped a whole night of sleep and have been running nonstop with gear following a trail after the death of their friend, um, with grief that's exhausting.
I mean,
It
they do
couldn't possibly
say,
be that.
and this might just be blustering, but one of them says, the weariness is more in my mind than in my body. I could keep going. I could totally keep going. We could all keep going, but just, oh, I feel this mental block. Long distance runners when they hit the wall. you know. Yeah, that may just be blustering from a bunch of people who just really need a nap.
Yeah, which they do take their nap, and I have a comment here that elves may or may not sleep,
Hmm.
because there's the line that, Legolas, if indeed he had ever slept.
Yeah.
um, It is a red dawn, he says, and I'm reminded of the old sailor's proverb, red sun and morning, sailors take warning. So uh, they they get up, and although that actually it was the previous day, my bad. But they take another rest again, where the night grows ever colder, and Aragorn and Gimli slept fitfully, but Legolas keeps like walking back and forth, singing to himself in his own tongue.
Which is
So
probably so annoying. If I was exhausted from running for multiple straight days, I mean, at that point, I'd probably just be so tired I wouldn't care. But I don't know. I get hangry if I haven't had a snack in a while. I can't imagine the kind of fucking foul mood I would be in if someone was just singing, especially singing quietly, where it's quiet enough that you can't accuse them of being inconsiderate. Because they're obviously aware and trying to be quiet, but it's just loud enough that you can still hear them anyway. That would just absolutely drive me nuts.
I whistle like all the time.
But I
And
like
my
your
roommate has
whistling.
called me out before for whistling in the morning before they're up. Because I fully don't notice that I'm doing it. But I understand, one, how the walls in our place are thin enough that they can hear it, and also it's annoying.
I can't whistle, which is probably a good thing because I would probably be an annoying whistler. But every time people try to teach you how to whistle, it's like that fucking Peppa Pig bit where her friend tries to teach her how to whistle and she just slams the phone. So everyone says, "Oh, it's so easy. Just do this." And then they whistle. And I say, "Great. That did not help me at all. I just can't." Also, my teeth are terrible and weirdly arranged in my mouth. So that probably hampers me somewhat. But yeah, whistling, good eyesight, just lots of things that are far beyond my reach in these chapters.
um, but they rise up now on the next day, and they see a dark smoke rising in the distance. I think they don't even really like start out the next day. Um, they watch the dawn grow slowly in the sky, and then they see like a dark blur in the distance, like a dark gray shadow,
Hmm.
right? And here we get an instance of the first law. Magic makes you a dramatic little bitch, because good God, Aragorn goes down to like listen to the ground, figure out what it is, and he goes, "Oh, it's horsemen, right? It's
Hmm.
horsemen. They're coming straight towards us." And it literally says in the text that like Legolas knows exactly what it is, right? He goes, "There are 105. Yellow is their hair and bright are their spears. Their leader is very tall."
Amazing. Legolas, you're
You just like
perfect.
you just let Aragorn keep his ear down in the dirt for 10 minutes while you counted horsemen.
While you're fucking singing your little songs.
and figuring out how tall their leader is.
So
Um,
good. So
and
good.
Aragorn is like, "Damn, you can see really well." And Legolas is like, "It's only 17 miles. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
5 leagues is 17 miles." Anyway, and we get our little lore dump on the Rohirrim.
And
Um,
Aragorn does a quick vibe check and says that they're cool. I don't know if you had a specific quote. I did.
please.
So, what Aragorn says to his companions about the riders: they are proud and willful, but they are true hearted, generous in thought and deed, bold but not cruel, wise but unlearned, writing no books, but singing many songs, after the manner of the children of the men before the dark years. And that reminded me of things that we've said about Sam and about Butterbur, of people having different kinds of intelligence and different kinds of wisdom. And that's basically what he's conveying here. That these are really noble people, might be a little rough around the edges, might not have most book learning, but they possess special knowledge and special skills that you should respect and be aware of.
Yeah, their histories are oral rather than written, but that doesn't
Hmm.
mean that they're less valuable.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I think of sort of modern ideas in archaeology. The historical view was that oral histories are less reliable, they're more prone to change, they're, quote unquote primitive, but oral history can be super well preserved, super well kept through the ages. And modern archaeological methods are, much more prone to treat oral history as history,
Hmm.
perhaps prone to inflection, but not necessarily prone to change. And oral history in Indigenous Australian tribes is so well kept that we have oral histories of events occurring like, prior to the last ice age,
Hmm.
right? Like 40 to 60,000 years worth of oral history.
Yeah, that's fucking incredible.
There's a one tale that strikes me is I don't remember the full myth. This is just coming back into my brain now, but it's a tale of one Australian Indigenous group where they tell a story of um, this one type of tree, and this one type of tree is only found in northern Australia and this one spot in central Australia,
Hmm.
right? And so they tell a story of gods coming out of the north and bringing the trees to them. And the there's something like a genetic like you can trace sort of how long things have been apart from each other based on the rate of genetic mutation.
Hmm.
And so the molecular clock between these two sets of trees roughly matches up with the time frame that you'd expect from this story. It's something like 14,000 years or something obscene like that.
That's so cool.
And yeah, and there's just oral history about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, Rohan means horse country roughly in like a Sindarin derived term,
Hmm.
right? And the people are the Rohirrim, which is a Sindarin derived name for horse lords.
Hmm.
The Rohirrim refer to the country as the Rittermark, um, and to themselves as Eorlingas after their first king, Eorl the Young. Eo means horse. And
That
we'll
makes
see that
sense.
like basically in the start of all of their names. We have Eomer, and Eothane and Eorl, and you've mentioned Eowyn. Um,
That okay. So I was not that far off about all the people having the same name and giving different names to horses. I was not too inaccurate there.
No, maybe not. But do we have anything else before we get into, so I feel like this is a thematic, like I said, that like this chapter is really 2 chapters thematically,
Mhm. This is
right?
something you said to me, not previously in the episode, if listeners are thinking, "Wait, oh my god, when did Rid say that?" That
Did
that
I
was
not?
something that you
Oops.
had texted me earlier. But yes, you are correct.
Yeah. This chapter, I feel like you've got the chase and then you've got the conversation with Eomer, and they're like thematically 2 completely separate chapters.
Yeah, I agree. And this
Um,
chapter is fucking long. This chapter is twice as long as the first one.
yeah, that first one we covered very quickly, but I feel like we're still covering this one real fast, but we're about to get into the whole conversation with Eomer.
Mhm.
So, um, are we ready to get into the conversation with Eomer?
I am so ready because he is, as I would say, a rude dude. It's a good thing that we were given a disclaimer about these people being kind of gruff because they do not hold back. Just first of all, just encircling our trio in all of their horses with their spears pointing inwards at them. That's a lot.
Okay. Okay, but in
But
defense of the Rohirrim,
okay.
uh, the they had just encountered a bunch of orcs moving through their land, right?
Mhm.
And it says like that they all hide under their cloaks, wait for the whole Aored, which in a full Aored is 120 men, and they've lost 15, so they're down to 105. And so they wait for like most of the Aered to go by until Aragorn gets up and just goes, "What news from the north, riders of Rohan?" It is a miracle that he didn't get shot by the horse archers on the spot.
That's fair. That's fair. And
It's
Aragorn is fully willing to step to them. He will sass them and he continues to, which is maybe a bit reckless.
Yeah, they have this whole dick measuring contest, right? Where they're like, "Who do you serve? I have the most bravado. Well, I have the most magical sword, and I have the coolest king, and I have the hottest dwarf boyfriend."
Literally.
Like, Gimli is ready to throw hands at zero provocation.
And
Um,
there's so many good lines in this. There's so many good exchanges. But my favorite thing that what's his face Eomer says is, "I would cut off your head, beard and all, Master Dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground." Stone cold. That was uncalled for. Just Gimli everywhere he goes. People just hate his vibes.
it's like your dog.
Yeah, Phoenix, my sweet, sweet boy. He's an American bully. He's brown and white. He's so cute. He has a giant head. And
He's adorable and I love him.
every dog who has ever met him, whether it's been a direct introduction encounter, if they just glimpse him across the street, if they look at him out the window while he's doing his business in the yard, every single dog will bark their heads off at Phoenix. I don't know why. It's literally nothing that he does. And I'm not someone who makes excuses for my dog because he can be evil and he can be nasty. And I am married to a veterinary technician. We have a very realistic sense of his behavior. And when he is doing literally nothing, other dogs are just like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, I hate you. And this is Gimli's like, Phoenix, like, why? What did he do to you?
I mean, to be fair, it's because Aemir says something about Galadriel, basically saying that like, shit, we thought there was a witch in those woods, and Gimli is like, absolutely not. You will not speak ill of Galadriel in my presence.
Yes.
But then of course, soon as Aemir's like, I should kill you, um, Legolas goes, I will kill you first before you even have a chance to touch my boyfriend.
Yeah, literally. "He stands not alone," said Legolas, bending his bow and fitting an arrow with hands that moved quicker than sight. "You would die before your stroke fell. Stand up for your boyfriend." I love it. Love it. And
Right?
there's
It's
another
just
good moment with them later that I'm so
yeah,
excited to talk about, but I'll be patient. It's coming.
patience, patience, my love. Yeah, no, it's just this giant dick measuring contest until finally uh they manage to, like, calm the fuck down. Because Aragorn at first gives his trail name, like, his traveling name, and then
Mhm.
Legolas's full fucking name to Éomer. Like, um, and Éomer's like, "And who's this dude?" And Gimli's like, "What are you, a cop?" Um, it's fucking perfect, this whole exchange. Which granted, I think this is partially because, like, they've barely slept. They're exhausted, and Éomer's trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, and like, you're in his space. He's entitled to be a little bit snooty about it.
Yeah.
He's also a noble.
And Aragorn was also the one, which, granted, circumstances are different now. Shit has fully hit the fan. But all the way back in Bree, Aragorn was the one saying, "Don't tell these nice people at the Prancing Pony your real name." And now you are just giving all of your information to these heavily armed people right in front of your face. Like, who is more dangerous to you? The totally harmless people in Bree or the Rohirrim? But obviously not equivalent circumstances. It is just very funny to me that Mr. We have to conceal our identities is just putting Legolas's full government name out there for no reason.
Yeah. Well, and then they have a whole conversation about, like, who do you serve? Who's got the coolest king? Do you serve this bad dude whomst we hate? No? Cool.
Mhm.
And then, he throws back his cloak and
Amazing.
shows Andoril, goes, "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I'm called Elisar, the Elfstone, Dunedain, the heir of Isildur Elendil's son of Gondor. Here is the sword that was broken and is forged again. Will you aid me or thwart me? Choose swiftly."
So
Um,
good. So good. I love him.
and, it says, he seemed to have grown in stature while Aemir had shrunk.
Yes.
Um, because I think there was one point in a previous episode where you mentioned, like, catching Aragorn in the right light, we see what kind of king he's meant to be.
Mhm.
But I think here is the first time that we see him using this,
Yeah, this isn't
right?
just a stolen glimpse. This is actually making use of that effect that he can have on people.
Right. Um, and you know, I love that, like, Aemir, frankly, is handling this all really well
Mhm.
because he's having shit jump out of myth at him, and he says as so later. He has a line. He says, "The world is all grown strange. Elf and dwarf in company walk in our daily fields, and folk speak with the Lady of the Wood and yet live. And the sword comes back to war that was broken in the long ages ere the fathers of our fathers rode into the mark. How shall a man judge what to do in such times?" But, like, they've heard of the weird dream prophecy from Gondor, but all of a sudden, the weird bearer of the sword that was broken, right, shows up with an elf prince and dwarven noble and goes, "Hey, I'm looking for some dudes mentioned in a prophecy who are also mythical creatures to you." Because, like, they mentioned they don't know what hobbits are. They're like, "We thought they were a myth,"
Oh,
right?
yeah,
He goes,
and Gimli has to explain to them that hobbits are real because he's, saying that we're looking for these halflings. And the Rohirrim are saying, "Well, we killed all the orcs and we didn't see any children or dwarves. Is that what you're talking about?" And Gimli has to explain that hobbits are their own thing.
yeah, like, and when they explain halflings, they're like, "I thought that those were a myth." And I love that, like, no one fucking knows what a hobbit is,
Mhm.
right? Outside of the North. Like, no one, because the people in Lorien were like, "We didn't know that halflings were in Middle Earth," right?
Yeah.
And uh, Boromir didn't seem to know what a halfling was before he came to Rivendell, right? And so Aemir is just like, "No, I haven't seen these mythological creatures that you're talking about." And then he turns back to, like, his lieutenant and goes, "Hey, LT, can you, like, take everyone to form up over there while I talk to these strangers so they don't say anything else too weird in front of my entire company? Cool,
Yeah.
thanks."
And eventually you know, get they get him on board and can have a little bit more of a conversation. And there is some talk of Gandalf, who their king is still very unhappy with for taking Shadowfax. And
Mhm.
Aragorn has to break the news both about Gandalf and Boromir, who apparently everybody loved. And this was another point where we got a different perspective on Boromir and his sort of public reputation, and that he was really respected and admired, and him dying is this huge loss.
And again, I think we talked about that when we talked about Fellowship and why he was so out of sorts is because he's such a respected war leader.
Mhm.
And Rohan has had this long-running alliance with Gondor for generations. And so, for Boromir to be suddenly in a group of people that, like, don't have the respect for him that two entire nations of men have, uh, was strange for him. And that's not to excuse his behavior, but again, putting gives more credence to what we were saying.
Yeah, and it also, because I'm so used to people having power who don't deserve it. And, I think that we're both on the same page about the idea of nobility and monarchy and authority being passed down through your blood. That's bullshit. Not a good way to have a government. But yeah, it hadn't really occurred to me that maybe Boromir deserved the respect that he got and had done things to earn it, and actually was really competent and capable and wasn't just blustering about as some rich whiny boy. I mean, he survived 100 days alone in the wilderness. He's got skills. And this sort of reminded me that, oh yeah, he actually was a really capable person, and there's good reasons to respect him.
Right. Um, Amir's like shocked that they've come so far. He tells them they've come 45 leagues, which is, according to my math, 155 miles or 250 kilometers
Absolutely wild.
in under 4 days, which includes probably like a total of about 12 hours of rest in there, which
And
is ridiculous.
there was one more thing before we move on too much forward. Um, After Eomer talks about how shall a man judge what to do in such times. As he has ever judged, said Aragorn, good and ill have not changed since yesteryear, nor are they one thing among elves and dwarves and another among men. It is a man's part to discern them, as much in the golden wood as in his own house. And I really liked that line, that
Mhm.
times are always strange, shit is always happening, but your responsibility to make ethical choices is always going to be the same. And this is more of Tolkien's sort of black and white morality, that he's saying that everyone has the same idea of good and evil, and they are objective universal truths, which, sure, in this story, I'm willing to accept to a degree. But I do like the idea that you can't use the excuse of complicated or unprecedented times to avoid what you know is your moral duty.
In these unprecedented times.
Now more than ever.
But, like, Aragorn saying, like, "Yeah, it is up to, any one man to determine how he is going to treat others, right, in his
Mhm,
space, how he is going to apply his morals," right? I think we can all sort of sympathize with that, in a world where we've been abandoned by the institutions that are supposed to protect us and defend us to
mhm.
an ongoing pandemic. Um, they're like, fend for yourselves.
Go be
It's a
free.
personal choice whether you want to wear masks and not infect everyone around you.
Continue
It
sending your
is
children to school. We will punish them
it
if they're
is
absent.
Yeah, it is the position of the Phantom Apprentice that, masking in public is absolutely something you should still do.
And they make cute masks now, and they're affordable. You can get colorful ones. This isn't
Yeah.
the height of the panini where they were
Even
hard to get.
even now in 2024, particularly now where we're recording, here in early 2024, where according to wastewater data, COVID levels are the second highest they have been, since the start of the pandemic. So, now you should absolutely be masking if you can, mm, taking COVID precautions as much as you possibly can, and keeping up to date on your vaccines.
Also, even if you're sick
Mm.
with something that's not COVID, other illnesses still exist.
Yeah, hospital admittance rates for combined respiratory illnesses are going up in this season. It is wise for people to be careful and to treat others well. This is a tangent now, but as somebody who has worked in the public health sphere of things, um, I'm and also just as a human being, very deeply passionate about um, keeping myself and my community safe from preventable diseases.
Mhm. It all relates back. Even when times are strange and there are legends and mythical creatures walking among you, you still have control over how you decide to treat people. And
Mhm.
if you make if you have a strong sense of what that means to you, if you have a strong sense of how you feel like other people should be treated, if you are making decisions from that place that are consistent with those values, then you're probably doing okay.
Mhm.
And that doesn't fundamentally change from year to year or from culture to culture.
Well, um, looking at my notes, where were we?
I can tell you where we were because we are coming up on a thing that I enjoy very much. So there's more negotiation, more discussion. Aragorn convinces the Rohirrim to let the hunters go, and they give them spare horses, which is a huge deal and extremely kind. And so they describe the horses. The horses have names. If you're a horse person, that's great. That's awesome. I'm sure
Hasufel and Arod.
there's descriptions like what they look like and stuff, which is very fun. But Gimli does not want to go on a horse. No fucking way. And so Legolas offers to have Gimli ride with him. And Gimli agrees, and there's a funny line about how he is not much more at ease than Sam Gamgee in a boat. And that's, a fun parallel to our other couple in the party. But my spouse has given me their enthusiastic permission to refer to them as a former horse girl. And so I asked my spouse about
The
this
only
whole,
gendered thing that we can ever talk about your spouse.
yeah. So this former horse girl is telling me, because I was asking them, Legolas is riding this horse bareback. And I was saying, is that hard to do? Like, is it harder to ride without a saddle than with one? And they were saying, well, it might be slightly more physically difficult for the rider, but it's a little more comfortable for the horse because they don't have a heavy saddle and you have more physical connection with the horse. And so it's easier to control them and communicate with them. I said, okay, that's great. So what if it's the same situation, but you also have a dwarf on there as well? Does that kind of undo the no heavy saddle thing? And so they look at me and they say, yeah, and this is a bareback situation. And I go, oh, this is a bareback situation.
Oh,
And as soon as that phrase was uttered, I knew that was going to be my best joke of the recording. So,
well
yes,
done.
there are riding lessons being given. This is a bareback situation. But on a more
Um,
serious horse note, they said that it would be extremely difficult for Legolas to control the horse with Gimli clinging to him, and they were like, "He's clinging?" I'm like, "Oh, he's clinging." So,
Well, Gimli is in front of Legolas, I think. "You
okay.
will ride before me," I believe is the line. Or "You
Well,
will go
then
before I will bear you
still
before me," or something.
with another person on there, this is a really physically difficult thing to do. And we know my fear and respect for horses. So, that is my
Yes.
that's my horse report.
Thank you so much for that. I do also the, like, one thing I know about horses and about, like, horse saddles is, like, the invention of the stirrup, um, was, like, a massive military shift. It enabled, like, so many changes in the way cavalry was used.
Oh, yeah, they
Um,
talked about the lack of stirrups in this situation too. Stirrups are important.
so, them not having no saddle, no stirrups, and he's just controlling the horse and being okay, and, but that's because he has a way with animals because he's an elf.
Of course. My fun little stirrup factoid is I am Armenian, and Armenians love to claim that we invented literally everything: wine, astronomy, stirrups. There are basically every significant historical human invention some Armenian is going to claim was invented in Armenia. I have no idea whether or not it was true. Probably not. I think that's the kind of thing that maybe, was simultaneously invented some other places. I'm not a horse historian. I don't know. But that just always makes me chuckle when I think
A
about
horse
stirrups.
storian?
A, or should I say, nay?
That's your best joke of the episode.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, yeah, but they finished their various arguments and discussions with Eomer. They promise Eomer that they will come to Meduseld, to return the horses when they can.
Mm, they're not going
Um,
to be able to do
which,
that.
yeah, if you've ever played D&D and you know exactly what's about to happen to these mounts. um, so yeah, the only thing Gimli will be riding from now on is Legolas. um, but yeah, they sort of, as they go off, they have like a whole talk because they find the killing fields where the Aerid killed the orcs, right? And they fear they can't find any sign of the hobbits, and so they fear that the hobbits are dead. Um, and Gimli sort of mentions, like, Elrond didn't want them to come,
Yeah.
right? And Gandalf and Aragorn goes, Gandalf did, basically. And Gandalf wasn't concerned with safety because this is not a safe adventure. And basically it was going to be more unsafe for anyone to stay behind, you know,
Yeah.
if we did not go about this. We all went on this adventure knowing that some of us would not come back. And I think we talked about that last time too, with, Frodo has a feeling he's going to his death and is going anyway. And so, but they, settle down in the shadows of Fangorn Forest, which is mentioned to be as old as Tom Bombadil's old forest, right?
Yeah,
It is
that's no small
another one of
thing.
these primordial forests, and it's much, much larger than Tom Bombadil's forest, right? It's something like 4 or 5 times the size. If I just compare visually, yeah, it's at least 5 times the size of the old forest.
That's wild.
And so, we get the sense that Fangorn has some strange power. You should not be cutting wood from the trees to make a fire, even though it's very cold and they only have one blanket apiece. And Legolas and Gimli are just going to have to snuggle.
Yeah. I was reading the sentence saying that they only had one blanket apiece, and I got so excited thinking they only had one blanket. No, they only have one blanket each. Ugh.
And
There
there
was
was
only one
only
horse.
one bed.
There was only one horse. That's the applying that there was only one bed trope to the horse is like if they were at an inn room that had 2 beds and they just shoved one of the beds off the balcony and went, "Oops, there's only one bed."
It's
Gimli
the
was
it's
offered his own horse. And they went, "No."
um and well, and Aragorn, when Gimli's offered his own horse, is like, you cannot possibly run fast enough to keep up with us. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You were already struggling. You cannot run fast enough with a horse, buddy. Yeah. What was my next thought?
They're
Brain is
making
pacing.
camp. It's creepy.
They're making camp, horses riding, only one
One
bed.
blanket.
Oh, it was the only one bed thing. It's like shoving two twin beds together in a college dorm.
Which I may have done. I may have
um,
gotten adjoining rooms with my partner at the time, who was also my RA, and we might have put both of our beds in the same room and just slept on the mega bed. And everyone in res life knew about this and was okay with it, which is wild. They shouldn't have been, but it worked out for me. I had 2 rooms.
there you go. A nice little suite.
Yeah, we had a bedroom and an office. It was great.
Amazing. Um, they make themselves a small fire with like cast-offs of wood, so they don't cut anything from Fangorn. Aragorn, like they draw watches, and Gimli's taking the first watch, and Aragorn is very on Gimli. Like, don't fuck with Fangorn.
Mhm.
Don't do it. But then, of course, something else fucks with them.
Oh, yes. Is this the old man, or are you thinking of something different?
The old man.
Which I don't think we had mentioned previously, specifically what this seems to be a callback to, is when they're talking to the writers, they're saying that they are really afraid of. Now, this is where the S names fuck me up, because which fucking one of them is it? Sauron, probably.
Sauron.
Sauron. Okay.
Sauron.
Yeah, that he has been like seen in the land and they're afraid to speak negatively of him because he'll just appear in disguise in the market or walking down the road as an old man and you never know where he might be or where he might be watching. So it's heavily implied that this is Saruman watching them.
Hmm.
And that's
Especially when,
terrifying.
especially when the horses are spooked off.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does nothing else to them. He just appears in the night. Aragorn, does the like, would you like to share our fire? And then the horses are spooked and he disappears.
Mhm.
Just, showing he can get to them.
Yep. A little bit of mindfuckery. The
Oh
long
yeah.
game, the horrors.
Oh yeah. But that's where we end these chapters. So, Sammy, anything else you want to talk about for this
Mm.
beginning of the Two Towers?
Nothing else that's super detailed. I'm really enjoying the landscape and the setting. I feel like we got more just really good sense of place, lots of description of the landscape as having different like body parts, like a shoulder
Hmm.
of a cliff and things frown there was like some other cliff that was frowning at them and all of these different personifications of the landscape in a way that just really made it clear how craggy and layered it was and that they're clambering over and around and through all of these rocks and it was just really evocative and I can see why I haven't seen the movies, I've just seen little clips and gifs and stuff from them. I can see why you need majestic New Zealand landscapes to capture Middle Earth because all of these places are just magnificent.
Well, and I really like your analysis there of the anthropomorphization,
That's the
anthropo
word. Yeah.
anthrop
That.
whatever the Thank you. Anthropomorphizing of the world.
Anthropomorphization.
Thank you. Of the world around them, because we've also previously had actual physical, uh, like, people that represent the world, actual physical spirits of place,
Mhm.
right? We've had Tom Bombadil. Um, we've had, like, Old Man Willow and representations of the world itself. The trolls are beings made of stone,
Yeah.
um, which is just really fascinating to, like, think about the world as if it's, yeah, it's got body parts, as you said, but it's also got and it's also got these actual physical beings in it that represent the world around them. And so anytime you see a face in the land, it might be a face in the land. And some of that is like, I guess, harkens back to the myths that Tolkien was drawing upon,
Like Beowulf?
right?
Does it all come back to Beowulf?
In this case, it's not going to come back to Beowulf, I'm sorry to say. But it
Sad.
is going to come back to, like, Norse mythology, like the world carved out of the body of Ymir, um, and back to Greek mythology, where um, the world was Gaia, and Gaia is the earth. And these, deities of the earth are physically the earth themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love this section of the book. It is one of my favorite sections of Lord of the Rings. Um, Next time we get to meet my favorite character in the entire series,
Oh boy. I'm excited.
which is very fun. So I'm excited for that. Those of you who are familiar with the series will have a clue as to who I am talking about slash what I'm talking about.
Oh,
Um,
what? Okay.
I'll leave that in Sam's brain for the week because we record weekly, but you will have to come back in 2 weeks to hear us talk about the next part of the book, um, and find out what happened to Merry and Pippin while all of this was going on.
Poor Merry and Pippin all alone.
um, so, if in those intervening 2 weeks you would like to still chat with us or interact with us, you can do so. You can send us an email at thefandomapprentice@gmail.com. You can follow us on our social media at FanAppPod on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.
Can you tell
uh,
we have a preference for which one we like to use the most?
I have not downloaded TikTok back onto my phone. Deleted it as part of, like, a little, like, social media break, but really a TikTok break. God, was that like 6 months to a year ago or something like that?
It was a long time ago. I forget which one of us deleted it first, but I think both of our lives are better for it.
Yeah, and then I re-downloaded it when we started to do podcast things, went, this is already eating up too much of my life, deleted it again, and went, I'll download it again when the podcast goes live, and didn't. Um,
We used to
so at
send each
some
other
point,
so many TikToks. Now that I'm thinking about it, we would
yeah.
send each other like 30 TikToks a day.
Oh, easily. Easily.
Yeah. Anyway,
Um, so yeah, and Twitter is a hellfire, but you are still more than welcome to follow us on both of those platforms, and I will make use of them to some extent at some point. But Instagram is definitely where we will be posting the majority of our social media interactions. Um, but you can always send us messages on our social media. You can send us an email, thefandomapprentice@gmail.com. You can rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, especially if it allows written reviews. Really helps people find the podcast, especially a 5-star review if you like what you're hearing. You can talk us up to your friends. And at this point, we have a pretty decent backlog of episodes to listen to. So, yeah, tell your friends to check us out. And we'll be back at you in your ears in 2 weeks with another episode. Anything more to add, Sam?
No, just thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
The Phantom Apprentice is produced and edited by Rin and Sam. Our music was composed and performed by James, and our art is by Casey Turgeon. This podcast is created for non-commercial entertainment purposes, and the opinions expressed therein are our own and are not reflective of the opinions of any other person or organization. The content discussed is the property of the Tolkien estate and is used here under fair use.